From Upstate Medical University in Syracuse, New York, I'm Amber Smith. This is HealthLink on Air. What is it like to be surrounded by friends who are maturing into young adults while your body remains physically underdeveloped? My guest is a poet and Emmy-winning filmmaker who has written a coming-of-age memoir called Stunted, a Memoir of Delayed Manhood. Francis DiClemente works in the marketing department at Syracuse University, and years ago he underwent brain surgery at Upstate University Hospital. Welcome to HealthLink on Air, Mr. DiClemente.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You had brain surgery first in 1984 to remove a brain tumor. How did you learn about the brain tumor?
Well, I was the summer before I started high school in Rome, the summer of 1984, and I was going to turn 15 years old, and everybody else was growing and had their growth spurts over the past couple summers, and I hadn't. And I had no symptoms. I had no vision issues, no headaches, but I just kept bugging my parents that I felt like something was wrong, and I wanted to go see a doctor to find out why I wasn't growing. I mean, they're both short, and they kept telling me, well, we're short, you're going to be short too. But I was like, I kind of feel like something's wrong, and at least we could look into it.
How hard was it to get the diagnosis?
Well, I had to go to a family doctor, and he was great because he actually listened to me and he kind of understood. He's like, I don't really know, but let me send you to Upstate, and we'll send you to the endocrinology department there, pediatric endocrinology.
What do you remember about the surgery itself and the recovery?
Well, the surgery was, like I said, I really had no symptoms. So in a way, I didn't really understand the severity of it. I met the neurosurgeon and they put markers on my head of where they were going to go in, but I was still so young that I didn't really see the threat of it, but it ended up being like an 8.5 hour operation. And obviously when I woke up in a lot of pain and had to restrict fluids, I couldn't drink. I was really, really thirsty. And as a result of the surgery, the pituitary gland was damaged. And so I had hypopituitarism, which basically meant I had lost all function of the pituitary gland. So initially, the biggest concern was the cortisone. I didn't have cortisone, so I needed to have a steroid replacement. And also I had diabetes insipidus, where my body couldn't control urine output. So I was really, really thirsty. And then I had to have a replacement hormone for that, which was DDAVP or desmopressin.
Now, I think in the publicity for your book, you mentioned a Disney World trip. Where did that fit in?
That was in the winter, like February 1985. So I had recovered. I'd gone back to school, and it was probably like a spring break. And I think my mom just thought it would be good for me to go down to Florida. I have an aunt who lives in Florida. She's a nun down there. And so I visited her. My grandmother flew with me down there, and then we went to Disneyland, but it wasn't planned beforehand.
Now, since then, you've had additional brain surgeries, is that right?
Yeah, a total of 4 surgeries and 2 gamma knives. This type of tumor, benign tumor on the pituitary gland, they tend to grow back. The danger is the location. It's right on the optic nerve. So in 1988, after my freshman year of college, they saw that the tumor had grown back and they needed to do something with it. So they did transphenoidal, like up through the nose surgery. That was in 1988. And then over the course of the years, it did grow back, but it wasn't affecting anything. And then in 2011, when I was living here in Syracuse, I had double vision. Like I went to an SU football game and I was seeing all these people like that weren't moving figures and like a movie, and seeing like letters that were jumping on top of each other. And then I had to have another transphenoidal surgery through the nose. And so that was 2011. And then I had gamma knife surgery in 2012. And then it grew back again, had gamma knife surgery in 2020, and then finally grew back again. And that really affected my vision. And I had to have another through the nose surgery in 2023. So it's one of those things that does come back. I have an MRI scheduled next week, and so I really don't know what the status is.
Now, why do you say that your head remained partly stuck in the decade between 1984 to 1995?
Now, do you mean when I was writing the book?
Yes.
That was a time period of like, I'm a 15-year-old boy. I look so much younger than everybody else. I have this tumor. They removed the tumor, but it doesn't solve anything. It took me a long time to grow. I had to have growth hormone replacement and testosterone replacement. So then I'm going off to college in 1987, looking like a 14-year-old boy, like basically Doogie Howser, but not smart, not super smart. going through that as a college student and then finishing college and embarking on my professional life. It was sort of that stage of going from boy to man, but a little bit more delayed. So that's where the period takes place for the memoir.
How did you deal with your body being underdeveloped during those times?
I mean, it was very difficult. I had a lot of shame about it. I looked so much younger than other people, my male peers. I looked more feminine. My voice was much higher. So I struggled with identity. I think I just dealt with it by listening to music a lot and reading and trying to get out of my head a little bit. But yeah, it was a challenge.
When and how did you learn about hypopituitarism? You didn't know about that before the
Mm,
brain tumor was
mm,
discovered, right?
No, I didn't know that. But after the surgery, they had a whole endocrine team that was part of it. And there was like, look, you need to replace this hormone. You need to take this at this time. And you need to replace thyroid and you need to replace cortisone that your body doesn't make. And all of those things. I had to really learn how to manage it too.
This is Upstate's HealthLink on Air with your host, Amber Smith. I'm talking with Francis DiClemente, who is telling us about his new memoir. One of the blurbs about your book says that you offer a reimagining vision of identity rooted not in the body, but in the soul. What does that mean?
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not sure who said that, but I guess it was like the feeling of self acceptance, but also thinking that identity is more than physical appearance, that it's about work ethic and character and responsibility and taking responsibility for oneself and resiliency. So I guess that's how I see it. And that's something, I struggle with every day. Self acceptance isn't a thing that stops just because you write a book, it's a daily struggle.
How do you define masculinity?
That's a tough one. I think it's along the same lines as that as identity, like a sense of responsibility, being compassionate, empathetic for other people, caring for more than just yourself, I guess.
You've written books of poetry previously, but let's talk about how you prepare for writing a memoir. Are there authors that you studied or
Oh yeah, yeah. It's much, much different. In a lot of ways, I've been writing this book since the 90s because I have diary entries that are included in the book that stretch back from 1993. I have medical records from Upstate from 1984. It took me a long time to sift through all that material and then to find out what are the scenes that are the most memorable and then writing those scenes and making a structure for the story. So it wasn't just like this happened and this happened and onward and onward. I studied the great memoirists like Mary Carr and Frank McCourt. Obviously, he was a huge inspiration to me because he didn't publish his memoir until he was in his 60s. And he worked as a teacher. So he's a working writer like me. And Augustine Burroughs. What I learned from them is that although it's your personal story, it's got to be relatable and universal to connect with readers who may not be interested in masculinity or brain tumors or whatever, and also to using humor throughout. That was a really good lesson too.
what was your goal in sharing such a personal story?
I guess first and foremost was just to see if I could do it because I thought that the story was really good, but I was a little bit afraid that the concept was better than my ability to write the book because I'm a poet and I haven't written a prose book. So that was it. But I hope that people will relate to it. I think the book is useful in the sense that anybody who's ever felt out of sync or uncomfortable in their own skin can relate to my story. And that's what I hope for it.
What advice would you give to another young person who is faced with hypopituitarism?
Oh, wow. I would say be kind to yourself, that this is something that's a very tough disease that you have to manage consistently. And that to just know that you're a little bit different than other people and you may not be able to do the same things as other people, but that you can have a really full, rich life. But also to be very diligent about management of meds, especially cortisone. If I get the flu or something, I have to up my stress dosage. If I have surgery, they need to give me an extra dosage of this. So those are all things you have to consider and plan, even when you go on trips and stuff.
As you were assembling all of your research for the memoir, did you think of anything that you wish you had done differently in your life?
You mean in my life, or
Or
do you mean
was
writing the book?
In your life, with just getting through this time period that was so difficult, did you think of things that you wish you had done differently?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, I wish I had been more confident and taken more risks. I studied communications and then I went to graduate film school at American University. And then part of that, before I moved to Florida to start working in journalism, I had this idea that I wanted to go to LA and try and make it in the film business. I didn't quite have the self confidence to do that. And so if I was looking back, that's the one regret I had. Maybe it wouldn't have worked out, but it would have been worth trying to risk it.
You live with this tumor that keeps growing back and has to be monitored, plus some other diagnoses that you talk about in the book. How have you learned to live with the uncertainty?
It's just something I've gotten used to over the years. This tumor came out in 1984, so I've been dealing with a long time. So it's kind of like that sense of knowing that at some point it's going to come back, but also having gratitude that, okay, I'm all right. I've had all these surgeries. My vision is okay. I still have a little bit of double vision if I look far to the right or up close without my glasses, but didn't wipe away my memory. I can still breathe. I can walk. I can talk. So I cultivate a sense of gratitude.
Can you tell us about the Emmy that you won? What was that film about?
Yeah, so that was a really passionate project. I'm obsessed with the movie It's a Wonderful Life. And there had been all these stories about Seneca Falls being the inspiration for Bedford Falls, the fictional town in It's a Wonderful Life. I worked with my old boss at Syracuse University, and he was really interested in it. And then we just decided to do it. And we got some help from Joanne Stork, and she's an executive producer of Honest Engine Films in California. And she was really into it. So she helped to finance that. It was just an investigation of all of the circumstantial evidence about the town. So it was just a short indie documentary, and it was a lot of fun to work on. And that won an Emmy. And then our team at Syracuse University won a second Emmy for a different project.
Well, Mr. DiClemente, thank you so much for taking the time to tell us about your new book.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
My guest has been Francis DiClemente, author of Stunted, a Memoir of Delayed Manhood. I'm Amber Smith for Upstate's HealthLink on Air. Upstate Medical University in Syracuse, New York, invites you to be the informed patient with the podcast that features experts from Central New York's only academic medical center. I'm your host, Amber Smith. What is it like to be surrounded by friends who are maturing into young adults while your body remains physically underdeveloped? My guest is a poet and Emmy-winning filmmaker who has written a coming-of-age memoir called Stunted, a Memoir of Delayed Manhood. Francis DiClemente works in the marketing department at Syracuse University, and years ago he underwent brain surgery at Upstate University Hospital. Welcome to The Informed Patient, Mr. DiClemente. This is Upstate's The Informed Patient podcast. I'm your host, Amber Smith. I'm talking with Francis DiClemente, who is telling us about his new memoir. My guest has been Francis DiClemente, author of Stunted, a Memoir of Delayed Manhood. The Informed Patient is a podcast covering health, science, and medicine, brought to you by Upstate Medical University in Syracuse, New York, and produced by Jim Howe, with sound engineering by Bill Brokel and graphic design by Dan Cameron. Find our archive of previous episodes at upstate.edu/informed. If you enjoyed this episode, please invite a friend to listen. You can also rate and review the Informed Patient podcast on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you tune in. This is your host, Amber Smith, thanking you for listening.